This conference will now be recorded.
Ta-da! Okay, guys, welcome. Thank you for joining me. So today we are doing objection handling. This is a little bit of a hard class for me to do online only versus in person, because a lot of what I also talk about is language and your body posture, which is obviously impossible for me to show you this way. Even if I turn my video on, it's still not going to be the same thing. So we'll try to cover a little bit about that, and then I would recommend that if you have any questions on that piece of it, to follow me back up. I may turn my camera on, and we'll see. You can see my bad hairdo today, and we'll go from there. But the first thing, so let me share my screen first of all, so you can see some of the material that we're going to go through. So can you guys all see the sheet on the screen about preparing for objections? Yes. Okay, great. Okay, so I am going to ask you guys to also join in verbally, because this works much better as a dialogue than only just me talking and people only typing. It's not particularly interactive, so the more we engage together, the more you guys are going to learn as well. So I do invite you to actually physically participate as we're doing this together. So the concept, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about first when we're talking about handling objections, there's a whole series of different types of objections. You'll see in this material that I've got here for you, that I'll certainly have Aaron published on Weebly, is that there's sort of really, like, 4 different main ones. There's also, of course, working with this as a listing focus. There's also working with them as a buyer, but really the concept are really the same. And if you can handle the objection on one, you can typically handle the objection on the other. So I'm focusing a little bit more on listings, as listings to live is the philosophy of how you build your business, and listings being that key to multiple ends and a higher ratio of clients. But the first thing that I want to talk about is, or ask you guys, actually is a better way to put it, is what are some of the objections that you want to be sure we cover in this time together? Anybody? Nobody has any particular objections they want covered?
People try to stall in that, Ann. That's always helpful.
Kim, I didn't hear what you just said. Can you say that again?
Sure. When they try to stall, and they try to push you off and stuff like that, it's like, and they're probably serious, but they're not letting on they are.
Are we talking about being a buyer or a seller?
It could be either or, really.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Objections on commissions for listing. I come across that a lot. People always trying to reduce.
Okay, that's a good one. Yep. Yeah. Anything else?
Probably come up as we go, Ann, I think.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So
and
the first thing,
how to say no to that?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Allison?
Can you teach me how to say no to that question when you get it?
Yes, how to say no to reducing commission.
Yes, please.
Well, I start at 6, and I'll give you 5 today.
Today's special only. So I think one of the first things that we have to talk about is actually sort of being mentally prepared for the reality of objections. And there's also a mentality, because our instinct is that when somebody produces an objection, is to be mildly defensive. Is that a fair analysis?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we have to change our mindset in is that an objection is a request for more information.
Exactly. Sorry.
And that's the very first thing that I want us to talk about. Because if you are instantly walking in a defensive position, that you're going to handle all their objections, you're going to shut them down, you're going to get them sorted, you're going to blah, 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 versus answering the questions. And in a lot of cases, that will actually resolve the objection. People are looking for clarification. they do not understand the process, they are new to the process, et cetera, et cetera. And we come into this meeting with so much information and so much knowledge that we forget what the learning level is of the people that are in the room. Welcome, Tanya. So what we have to first do is have that conscious mindset that this is not meant to be an argument. This is not meant to be negative in any way. This is a request for more information. It is an opportunity for negotiation. And based on that conversation, you will determine the outcome. That outcome might be a listing. That outcome might be that you are not the right fit for each other based on where you're going. So one of the first things that I want to talk about in addition to this mindset conversation is the conversation about language. And part of it has to do with the tonality that you use. Has anybody ever heard of the word mirror and matching? Has anyone ever heard that expression?
Yes. Yes.
Kim's heard it. That's Kim's voice, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Mirroring, we used to call it at Xerox.
Yeah. It's from the Carnegie School of Business. It's been around for a very, very long time, and pretty much any sales course you'll go on at some point, they will talk to you about it. Mm-hmm. So the concept is that, you know, you have to mirror and match, but then in some cases you have to be opposite, which I know seems like a contradictory statement for me to tell you. But when you have someone who is asking you a fairly detailed question, they're going to want a detailed answer back. They're not going to be happy with a one-line answer in most cases. So you're looking to mirror and match. When someone is speaking more slowly, you need to speak more slowly because you need to be communicating with that group or that person in a way that they're comfortable. And so a big piece of handling objections has to do with body language and has to do with your tonality. How close you're sitting, where are you sitting, how are you sitting? So let me see, Lord, help me, I'm going to turn my video on. Hi, can you all see me?
Yep.
Okay, so there's a lot of me here, just a minute, wait 1 second. So if we imagine, so I'm sitting at my desk right now, I was sitting leaning over at my keyboard because I am typing as I'm talking to you and moving around my screen. But if I'm sitting in someone's house, so I'm sitting in my chair. So if I'm sitting back, oh, that's really unflattering, but moving on from that. If I'm sitting back and I'm more relaxed and I'm sitting with this type of posture versus sitting this way at the kitchen table, I'm going to have a very different conversation and a much stronger ability to handle their objections if I am relaxed, if I cross my legs or however you sit that's most natural, then when you're like in their face, I'm going to handle this. Let's get over this. Do you guys see the difference?
Yes.
So part of it is having this conversation where someone asks you a question, you go, that's a great question. I would love to answer that for you. So you're putting your body back, you're relaxing, you're changing your tonality, you're not gripping your pen like with a death grip, and you're expressing I'm open to learning. I'm opening up for dialogue by sitting back in your chair. The odds are you are sitting when you're talking to them versus moving on the other way. And so one of these ideas is to think about what you're doing. And so the other piece of it is if you're having phone conversations is to have a mirror in your workspace. And that's a really old way of handling it. Changes your tonality. It will ensure you'll smile at yourself. You feel a little bit like an idiot when you first do it, but Kim, yep, smiling and dialing. And so it's a very sound, like Harvard Business School teaches this. It's a way of changing how you present and how you handle. So if you're starting to be defensive and you're starting to get tense, you'll see it in yourself when you're looking at the mirror in your workspace. Obviously, you're on the phone, the client can't see it because you're not doing a video conference with them, unlikely. And so you're going to change your energy, which doesn't sound very scientific, but it is true. And it will change the results you get in that conversation. So if you practice that, then, and you think about that when you're sitting with the client, that's That's the first piece. I can give you all the words in the world. We can role play this till we're blue in the face. But if you're role playing and you're tense and you're nervous and you're stiff, it's not going to matter what comes out of your mouth, because so much of it is this whole visual, your confidence, you being comfortable in terms of moving forward with the class. Does that help in terms of context before we get started into anything else? Anybody have any comments or questions on any of this? Crickets. I got crickets here, guys. Very hard to only talk to myself. I mean, you know, I am perfectly capable of talking to myself. Let's just be honest about the situation, right? So I'm just going to move myself over here, and then we will move the class over here. So the idea, I have mastered mirror and match, LOL. So that's what Allison said. And it is one of those things where, you know, you might be sitting with a couple and one of them, he or she is sitting in a much more aggressive fashion. The more aggressive they are, the further back you want to be. Yes. Going up towards them is going to have the opposite impact of what you're trying to do. And when you answer an objection, which is a question, remember that's the first conversation, with a smile, and you say, you know what, that's an excellent question. I would love to discuss that with you. Instantly you change the tonality, because they're expecting a bit of a fight, and it's very disarming when you're not coming to them from that position, when you come to them from a place of great, wonderful, that's a great question. I get that question a lot from clients, so that's a very commonly asked question. Look at you, that's fantastic. That makes you a very informed seller or buyer or whatever. And reiterating that these are reasonable things to ask. And the other piece of it is if somebody asks you multiple questions in one, is to break them down. So if somebody goes on and says, you know, we need to talk about commission and how long you're going to be, what's the listing time, and what are you going to do to sell my house? Okay, well, so my answer would be, okay, that's a lot of questions. So let's start. I'm going to go through my piece, going through how we're going to price and what our strategy is, etc. And then I'm going to write your questions down. If I haven't answered them by the end, then we can go back and we can pick it apart piece by piece and make sure that we get you the answers to what you're looking for clarification. And they're going to go, oh, okay, great. Okay, perfect. Maybe you're going to answer that. Okay, great, perfect. And so now they know that you've made a note. It's no different than when you see a facilitator in a classroom who asks the group up front and they write the questions up on a whiteboard. And then at the end of the class, they'll say, so did I get everything that's here? And 90% of the time, or maybe higher, all those questions have actually been answered. And there's way less to worry about. And you will do the same thing versus trying to answer a question out of context. If you say, okay, well, hang on a second, because that's actually, I'm going to answer that. I think I'm going to answer it for you. As I go through my presentation with you, if I haven't answered it to the full limit of what you're looking for, then we're going to make sure we go back to it. So what have I done right there? Can anybody tell me what that first piece of what I've just done is?
You've disarmed them.
A little bit, yeah. That was Carol for everybody.
You acknowledge what they're saying, right? By acknowledging their concern, you're validating where they're coming from. And by responding to it, you're showing that, yes, it's an important question, and then you are important.
Correct.
I think that you're also
Hi, Carol.
Of the conversation as well.
Carol Dale just joined in with video. Anybody else who wants to join in on video? I'd love to have all the faces up on the screen.
Brady Bunch.
You could have had two spectators.
Are you like behind me? You're like behind me in the room.
I was going to go in. I'm glad I didn't. There's only two.
Yeah, you didn't come into the room. It took us a few minutes to realize the thing was even going on.
Okay, so let's talk about this. So what the first thing that you've actually done in starting this conversation, there you go, hi faces, is you've actually already handled a bit of an objection instantly. Yeah. And so you're also showing that you're open to dialogue and answering questions, because remember, an objection is a question. It's only going to take the tonality of a fight if you take it there, right? Yeah. So does that make sense to everybody?
It's always
Go ahead, Kelly.
And I do feel and I don't know whether it was said or if you guys heard me say it, that I feel that that also is taking control of the conversation as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're the expert. And so remember, when you are showing confidence and you're not in charge, but in a soft way that, you know, you're not being overly aggressive. There's assertive and there's aggressive, which are two totally different things. But you're showing that you're, as Kim said, you're acknowledging their concern, you're open to listening, you're prepared to have a good dialogue, you're sort of handling an objection that they may have questions later and you're not going to, and you will deal with it. But again, you're also in charge and keeping control of your presentation, because whether it's a buyer presentation or a seller presentation, that is a factor that you can get derailed by the objection and then you can't get back on track. Is that fair for everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Allison has just added a note saying tone is important in every conversation and everyday dealings, not just with clients. Practice it with family members. Yes, I think it might be for family members, Allison, in all respects, and sometimes it is with clients because we're sometimes nicer to our clients and we're more instantly polite. We don't react the same way. But well, the idea is to practice it and practice it in group, practicing groups, you know, in teams, at, you know, do a group thing together where you're working on them, because if you don't, it's like a muscle. It gets really stale. So your tonality, your body language, sitting back, you know, not being too close at the table, you know, relaxing your hands, crossing your legs, however you sit. If you're a guy, don't fiddle with change in your pocket. There's nothing more distracting in the world than a guy standing there jingling change in his pocket while trying to answer your question. So, you know, the idea being, I think we're all girls on this particular call though, but the idea being that we're ready and we're open. And that is going to be one of the biggest pieces of handling an objection, is going to be the mindset that you're going into it with versus, oh my God, what if they ask me this? And you're all spazzed out. So with that note, so then a couple of points that you guys have brought up. So one of the questions Kim had was about what happens when people are trying to stall you or put you off. The second one that Allison asked about was about commission and being asked to reduce your commission. So what you're going to see on the screen here is actually an objection handling package that's in the MREA course that I've taught here. All of this material is, of course, available on KW Connect for you to download, and I will have Erin put this particular section up on Weebly for you after so that you can get at it. So when you're looking at you know, this part, so this is the instructor edition. I'll find the student one after. But the concept behind this is, you know, looking at, you know, the different places that you're in. And so this gives you a series of scenarios and some typical objection handlers that you can go. I just want to show you this quickly in terms of a resource, because it does go through, Kelly's on the phone. It does go through, you know, so for example, here's one for you, Allison, and it is on the reducing the commission. So it's, you know, an example, seller at ABC Realty says he will, or Joe at ABC Realtor says he will lower his commission to 4% if I list my home with him. So an example that they're giving is, sure, Joe at ABC Realty will do it for 4%. Let me ask you a question. If Joe is willing to give up his money so quickly, how quickly would he be willing to give up your money? I'm firm on my fee, and you can be confident that I will watch your money like a hawk. And so there's different ways to handle. So commission is a big one that you guys are dealing with in the industry generally. But one of the questions that I would always say is, when somebody asks you a question or gives you an objection, which we've determined are basically the same thing, is what are they actually asking you? So if someone's saying, I want to lower my price, I want you to lower your commission to 4%, what they're really asking you is what? You guys tell me, because I obviously have an opinion. What are they asking you?
To pay the other 1%.
But they're saying to you, like, what is their concern about your commission? What is their actual concern?
Oh, they think they're trying to save money?
Right, because they think they're going to net more.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
That's the actual question, right?
Yes.
So it's not necessarily about what they're paying. The question is, what are they going to get? What else are they asking?
Well, they don't want to pay you what you're asking. They just want to pay you low. lower, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's part of it. But the other piece of it is they're actually asking you, what are you going to do for your money versus, hi, Andrew. What are you, we're doing objection handling. We didn't know there's any humans in the room. So if you're doing it, what are you, they're comparing you to every other realtor.
Yeah.
So what are you do? They're asking you what your value is. Ultimately, what are you going to do for X percent versus what is so-and-so going to do for X percent?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Most people don't have an issue paying for service. But the question is, do they actually think you're giving them service, or do they think you're just all charging the same amount, and some people are doing stuff and some people are just sticking up a sign? So are you actually comfortable in explaining your value proposition back to these people? So Allison's saying yes. So that's one of the questions. There's two elements to it. One is they perceive that if they pay you 4%, they're going to let net less, or net more, sorry. And or what, 3% or whatever the number is. And they're also trying to figure out what it is that you're going to do to justify X cost versus whatever Joe said he's going to do. So part of handling the objection would be to focus on net. So it might be, for example, to have a conversation about, you know what, that's a great question, and I get that question a lot. The question that's important to know is that based on the net proceeds that we've done together, you can see that my statistical average is perhaps you sell for 99% of asking or 98% of asking based on how you price your homes. So it's not about what my commission is, it's about how I priced you and how I negotiate. Because the difference in the commission is it's built into the value. So one of the other objections to a commission is to be able to outline what your services are and to say, you know what, I'm very confident in the commission that I charge. I'm a referral-based agent or whatever it is that you're doing. And I have every confidence that after I go through the system with you, that you will definitely feel that you are getting value. And as you'll see, it's not affecting your net dollar in any negative way. Do you guys see where I'm going with that? Yep. So you're answering, but you're also explaining, and it's giving you an opportunity to show your value, your systems. You know, really, they want to know, they think that if they pay you 1% less, they're actually going to net that $2,000. But for example, if it's on a $200,000 house. But if they're working with an agent who doesn't have a marketing plan or doesn't do any systems and typically sells for 96% of asking price, you could show them that even by paying you 5% or whatever it is you've charged, you're actually going to net them more dollars than they would net using a different commission. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
So the other piece of commission is once you've gone through that, if they say, well, this is what I'm looking for, or you'll get, well, if I also buy a house with you, would you reduce your commission on the listing end? So what would be a typical answer to that question? Because remember, this is a question, it's not an objection, it's a question. Would you reduce your commission on your listing side if I also buy a house with you? Anybody? Allison says it's a lot. Anybody else?
I usually do a breakdown on how commissions work, right?
So that's one. So Kim just mentioned explaining how commission works.
Well, here's the deal, and I put it on that that I'm not getting the money directly. It goes to my broker, and it goes to my broker, and then they pay us from the office. Then that way they take their percentage, and I give them the breakdown. The government gets their 20%, the office gets this, and the rest is here. I said, and I just explain how it goes. People don't understand it. That's the problem.
Well, we're all going to Tahiti tomorrow with all our zillions. Let's just be clear, because that's what the public perceives. So that is one way to do it, Kim. I personally am not a big fan of that. That to me, that's too much minutia in some cases, but it's more of it depends on the person and what they're asking for in terms of what they're comfortable with. Because what you're also doing, you have to be careful, and this is just a comment, because you're also making your brokerage. It's not the broker, please note. I don't get paid by your selling house. You're making your brokerage look like an evil industry, right? Because you're like, well, they're going to take their piece, and then I'm going to give this to this guy, and then government, and crap, I'm just the agent at the end of this.
No, I don't say it that way. I'm very nice about it.
I know, but you just got to be careful, right? Because the goal is to elevate the role of the realtor so that you are the industry professional, not to get too far down in the weeds, right? And ultimately, you want them to have confidence in your services and the value that you're providing, because if you don't, when you go through difficult times throughout a deal, you want them to have faith in you, not just feel you cut them a deal. So one of the conversations and objections to that, for example, is having the conversation about, that is an actual separate transaction, and I'm going to work just as hard for you on that transaction. It's also explaining, for example, that, let's say you charge 5%. I'll just use that as a hypothetical because there is obviously no standard commission, because that would be in violation of the Competition Bureau. But hypothetically, you might choose to charge 5%. And so when you explain to them that you're actually going to share fairly with the other side, unless you'd like to pay me 7.5, because I'm okay with that, because then I can take 5 and I'll give 2.5 to the other side. But and so you can be disarming as well in your conversation.
Yeah.
That help? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you can say it's 5% or it's whatever, and also making sure people realize that there's HST. This is another piece of transparency that will help you in your negotiations on commission, because the other person didn't tell them that in a lot of cases. So, but we go back to the whole concept behind what we're doing here with respect to answering objections or answering questions, is providing an answer versus a defensive response to, that's great, if so-and-so charges X or Y, these are the services that we provide. This is my team, this is my whatever, this is the KW machine we have, this is our marketing, our app, or you can give lots of different reasons as to what and why, how you earn your commission, and how you're going to do it. You can also have the conversation about how commission is shared. So, for example, let's say you're at 5 and you're doing 2.5 and 2.5, and then you are going to go back to them with sorry, my back is empty. So you're going to explain to them that, you want to put 2.5 to the street because you want to make sure that their home is as competitive as possible in a competitive marketplace, and that there is no reason for another industry member to not want to beat down the door and show your house to all their clients. And the reality is that if you have a lot of different properties, and some are very similar in a certain area, that when they are at a lower commission, the reality is that if someone's potentially going to get paid more to sell a similar house, then they may be more interested. You'd love to say that doesn't happen in the industry, but it is possible. It's no different than anything else. And if you're working together with your client and by working, let's say at 5%, hypothetically, if that was the number you picked, 6, 7, I don't care, it doesn't matter what your number is, and you wanted to make the house more attractive after a period of time, then you might be in a position where you would say that you would be willing to work with your client so that, let's say you had to do a price reduction, that maybe you would move your commission from, say, 2.5 to 2.25 and put another 0.25 out to the street, so that you're working together on getting the home sold. So you're sacrificing together and making it the most attractive property on the street, but you don't work for less than X number. So there's different ways to handle that objection. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
The other part of it is to, again, be very, very confident in what it is that you are going to do for your client. What is it? Is it photography? Is it marketing? Is it paid advertising? Is it open houses? Is it virtual tours? I mean, everybody has a slightly different value proposition, and you need to be very comfortable with what yours is. The other piece of handling objections well is to be very confident in your statement. And if you've never practiced it, never said it, and you've never done it, it's not going to come out of your mouth with any amount of confidence. So they say, well, what is your commission? And you write it down. You say, I charge 5%, and then there's HST and X, and that's going to come off the sale price. It's actually built into the price. That is a very good objection handler, by the way, when you're dealing with commission, because people are pricing their homes based on homes that are for sale, and commission is built into the price of the sale of a home. Every single home that's on MLS has commission factored into the price. And if you are selling a home privately, it should be sold for an average of 2.5 to 5% less than the statistical MLS number, because the appraisers are using the same number and valuing the homes that way, and it is built into our market data. So the buyer is actually paying part of it, and it is moving through the marketplace as a value. It's built into the price. So when you gave them a CMA on the property, you gave them the numbers that included commission that was factored into that net sale price of that home. How do you guys like that one?
Oh.
Works very well, and it's true. Like, it's not a line, it's a legit thing. If you're comparing MLS listings, there is some form of commission in there. Might be $1, it might be 2.5, it might be 5, it might be 7. All you can do is work sort of an average number. And the reality is that it's in the price. So if we'd like to reduce the commission, then we should be reducing the price based on the CMA I gave you. They're not going to want to do that. So there's different ways to deal with this, but the end result is having a very clear understanding of what it is they're actually asking you. And if we go back to commission, the number one thing they're asking you is, number one, what are you actually doing for this money I'm paying you? Because the last person I worked with, whatever horrible things they did. And so you need to be able to defend and explain your value proposition. And the second thing that they're looking for is they're perceiving that there is a direct relation to the amount that you charge and their net dollar. And that is where using, for example, the KW tools that exist that will outline your percentage of sales and knowing your numbers and tracking your numbers to be able to show that you sell at X percent of asking price, and therefore that's more than the difference of the statistic in the market. So let's say the average market is 96% and you sell for 98% in all of your listings. Well, that 2% is greater a difference than the 1% they're asking you to discount. So you're actually going to make them 1% more than the person who's asking you to list at 4%. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one of the things when we're talking about objections. But again, the big piece of all of that is, again, that whole body language thing and being relaxed and comfortable and speaking confidently and having role played and practiced so that you are really comfortable answering these questions, which is what an objection is. An objection is a question. So when you go through, you can explain how commission is used. This is a win-win relationship. So this is all of these types of things. Other forms of objections that you often get might be, how long is the listing period? So one of the questions you might get is somebody saying, well, I don't really want to list for 6 months. I'd really like to list for 90 days. So anybody got an objection handler for that? That's a common one, I would think, that you're getting. Anybody? Kelly, you got one.
Sometimes what I'll say to them with that is, unfortunately, in this market that we're in, houses are taking a little bit longer to sell. So if we're averaging about 60 days on the market and then we're averaging, 45 to 60 days for closing, we'll actually be out of contract at the time that, we have an offer and we're waiting for it to close. So we're then going to end up having to do more paperwork. So the way that I like to handle it is just put in adequate time. But what I do assure you of is that if you, for any reason, unhappy with our services, there is an option to terminate if mutually agreed. And I've never held anybody hostage to their contract yet.
I say that always too.
Yeah, so these, and that's one question. So the only thing you got to be careful of with what you're saying there, Kelly, would be depending on the geography of the listing.
Except for today,
Yeah, we're not talking about that one. But
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, you've got a West End Halifax. Okay, it's going to sell. It could sell in a week. So, they're sitting for a long time isn't going to work, right? So you got to make sure that your statement is valid, right? And we are definitely bordering on a seller's market. We're right on the edge. We're balanced right now. We're tipping towards sellers. So saying that, well, I need 6 months when they're like, but you just told me that we should be sold in 2 weeks. Like, what? So you got to be careful about where you're at now. If you're selling in Sheet Harbor, you're probably good to say that, right? But you do have to take a little bit into account the geography. So one of the things that I would recommend for something of that nature is having a conversation about, making sure you know what the average listing times are. And your home might be the exception to the rule. And, we'd love it to be, but this is the reality. And also, I would also recommend that you present the fact that you are a business person who is putting the money out up front for them. So by hiring me, I am as committed to getting your home sold as you are, because I'm actually going to spend my money up front to advertise, install signage, pay photographers, do all that. And if I don't sell your house, I don't get paid. So what I'm looking for in return for my investment, and not only of my time and of my finances, is the mutual commitment. If for any reason I don't do my job, you have the right to kick me to the curb. And if you don't do your job and let me do my job, then we have a different conversation as well. But the idea being that you're letting them know that this is a give and take. And so this just makes it a lot easier. And then we have the ability to move through the market together with the fluctuations of the market. And I have confidence in our relationship, and you have confidence that I'm invested in you for 6 months. So do you see the tonality that I'm using there? Does that help at all?
That's really good. I like it.
So sometimes it's just having these conversations together in a group, and whether you set something up in the office where you do something every couple of weeks or whatever, before or after a sales meeting where people role play or practice, it is something that you have to practice, because it's not just going to come out of your mouth. You're going to be sort of like scrambling. Well, the standard is 6 months. That's not an answer. That's not going to satisfy someone who's asked a question. You need to explain why you want 6 months. I mean, we have lots of agents who list for a year, especially when we get outside of HRM. A lot of the listing contracts are for a year. So, it's moving from one level to the next and having an answer to that depending on the particular property. It might be based on the value of the property and how much money this person is asking you to invest in tours or drones or, all of those types of things. And that in order to do that, this is my business requirement. And you want me to be integral and proud of the business I'm providing you. And so this is the relationship that I'm looking for. So what happens as an objection handler if you have a person who says, well, I really want 4% or 3.5% or else, and you've given them all these things that we've talked about. You've explained the market, you've explained things you're going to do, your value, how it's in the price, you've done all that. What is your next stage?
What would you like to remove type of thing? Do you want to not use a professional photographer and stuff like that? Can you go from that angle, like in a nice way?
You can, but you have to make sure, Kim, that you're actually prepared to have different business models of service.
Right,
because,
okay.
And that's a decision that you make as a business person as to what you're going to offer. But if you're saying, for example, generally what I've seen from the agents here is, this is my standard. This is who I am. This is the value that I bring. I'm really good at what I do. And when you work with me, you're going to get X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, right? If you don't work with me, then this is why you're working with me, is because I give you these things. So now I'm going back and saying, well, actually, I'm not super committed to a professional photographer. And they're like, well, how much is a professional photographer? You can't legitimately tell them that it's 1%, right? Right. That's not true. If it is, you are way overpaying your photographer.
Exactly.
So, but the concept being, whatever your business standard is what you have to be prepared to stick to. So the reason I'm asking this is because sometimes what happens is agents are literally compromising their own integrity because they want this listing so badly.
Right.
Has anyone ever done that?
Yeah, I'm of the mind that there's this point well, the only time I've ever done it has been for extenuating circumstances, when maybe people split up or things have happened, and I always set the expectation that there's a good chance that they're going to be getting an offer that's going to state that they need to pay the 2.5% commission, because that happens a lot. I just tell them that, unfortunately, I'm not going to work for less, really, is what it comes down to. If I was to tell you tomorrow that you had to go in and you had to do the same job today as you did yesterday, but I'm cutting you at what you're saying is 0.5%, but I'm telling you that's actually 20% of what you're getting paid. Are you going to do 20% less work? Or are you going to be happy with that? Is this going to work for you? Because unfortunately, with my business model, it doesn't work for me.
I've only done we've only done it once, and it was to get market share.
Right.
Sorry, yeah, it was to get market share in a lucrative area.
And now remembering too that there are certain, I will say, expectations in the market as you change price points to a certain degree. Okay, so it's less likely that you're going to get $1 million listing at 5%. Let's be honest about that. Because it's also, at a certain point, there is some natural negotiation that will happen, but we're talking about the normal average and sort of what you're looking for with respect to commission. But the concept being that at a certain point, so Kelly handled that objection extremely well. That's a really great one that I know has been taught in bold many times. And it's about actually showing them that it is in legit 0.5% is 20%, or 1% is 20% of your commission that you're asking them to cut. And so, you expect the same service from me, and yet you are asking me to reduce my take.
And the reason why I say the 0.5% at 20, because I always tell them it's absolutely not negotiable to pay the buyer's agent less than 2.5%, because we want them to sell your house, right? And, they agree with that because we've already went through that. So, the most you're getting is 4.5%. And again, that has to be a really special situation for me to even offer that to anybody. And I wouldn't say that to them, but do you know what I mean? Like when I'm saying that 0.5%, I'm looking at this is the side I'm getting paid on, and I'm only getting paid, 2% versus 2.5%. So yeah, that's.
Well, you can have the conversation as well
I always,
about.
like, there's never a time when I'm paying that.
Right. And the other piece of it is also, for example, explaining as a seller's agent that you're the one incurring the cost and the risk, and the buyer's agent is not.
Yeah.
Right. So there's lots of different ways. And I mean, as I said, this is like a 16-page thing that we're going to put up on Weebly that goes through this. But the whole concept, again, is fundamentally that these questions, which is what they are coming back to the concept of having an actual qualified quality answer to handle those. Thinking about your tonality, being confident in what it is. But the reason I mention this is I'm not suggesting that y'all run away from listings, but at a certain point, you might make a business decision because you are business people that this is not the right fit. And that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
But it takes a certain place in your business to get to that point where you're actually prepared to say, you know what, I don't think we're on the right page. And I don't think I'm not the right person for you. One of the other things I would recommend when you're talking about listings or pricing or any of these different objections, because they're all the same, they're really all exactly the same question, or they're looking for you to validate what it is that you're doing and charging and why you're recommending a price and et cetera, et cetera. But all of it comes down to the fact that you know what you're doing. This is what your numbers are. This is who you are, what you do, and being comfortable and confident in answering that. And the number one thing you can do is to listen and then to provide a solution to that client and a reasonable explanation as to what and why you're doing what you're doing. When we don't have the answer, that's when we stumble, and that's when we dig ourselves into a hole that's very hard to get out of in terms of how we're moving forward, okay? So one of the other things, where again, whether you're talking about how you're going to write the price or how you're going to do it, is based on this is your experience. This is why you've asked me to be here, and to be your expert and to give you those choices. So, just a second here. One of the questions that also came was the question of stalling, and somebody, I'm not sure if they want to list yet and not ready to buy or not ready to sign a contract with you, and 90% of the time in those cases, it's probably because enough questions haven't been asked. So when you're in an appointment and you're listening to these questions, it comes back to who's talking more and how many questions are being asked. Because the more questions you get and get out to your consumer, the more information they give you, which allows you to strategize accordingly. I'll give you an example. I was sitting with one of my team at a listing appointment a little while ago, and this particular vendor wanted to list their house at a number that, like, I don't know where they pulled it from. Right? I could say something inappropriate, but they pulled this number. And they were going on and on. This is the number that they wanted to get to sell their house. And at one point, we asked the question, said, well, because they built the house, and said, okay, so you built it in X year. Yep. And so you paid X for the land. Yep. And it cost you how much to build the lot? Yep. Okay, so that was X amount of years ago. So we had about 3 years of flat growth where we were no growth at all in our market. And so at X amount of years, based on, say, 2.2%, per year, which would be, some cases we were 0, some cases we were 3. We're not in the 5% per year growth anymore. So based on X amount of years, based on the math I did, then this would be the market average for your house, assuming no improvements and you haven't really done anything since you purchased it, correct? He says, yep. And I said, okay, so that number is $150,000 lower than the number you're asking me for. So can you please tell me how I can explain to another professional who can do the math I just did why they should pay $160,000 more for your property? They had no answer. Well, because that's the number I want. Great. But do you understand what I'm saying? So you're continuing to ask questions about where it is. And in the end, we decided that if they wanted to list their house at that particular price, which was loony, to be perfectly blunt, then we are not the right people, because we're not talking a little bit overpriced here. We're talking like big time, right? And we're not prepared to do that. And so that was a business decision. Somebody will stick their sign up on their lawn and spend a ton of money and a ton of energy and make you all kinds of promises to sell your house. But that's not going to be me, because I can't actually do the job you've asked me to do, which is to actually put a sold sign on. You're not hiring me to put a for sale sign up. You're hiring me to put a sold sign. Do you guys see the difference?
I like that one. Yeah.
Right. So an objection handler is to say, for example, well, this is the price I would like to list it at. And there was I can't remember who the speaker was. It might have been here. It might have been at one of the KW events. Is to say, if I was going to go buy a house, would I pay for your house as an expert? Would I pay you what you're asking for? If I can't do that, then I'm not pricing it properly. Do you guys also understand the concept of how appraisals work and how money is financed? Because if you don't understand how money is lent,
that's
based on the appraisal value, right? So if the house is listed at $500,000 and they're putting 10% down, that's $50,000. So they need to be able to be financed for $450,000. So if that house, the bank will only lend 90% of the appraised value, period. So you can list a house at $500,000 and some crazy person might come along and offer you $500,000 for the house, which is great. That's fantastic. Yay, I'm a miracle worker. And then the appraisals happen and sometimes they get challenged and the appraisals come in at $450, not $500. Well, the bank's only going to lend 90% of $450, not $500. So we need to make sure we're really right on your pricing, or you're going to get halfway through your house being sold and be very disappointed because the bank won't lend the money. So understanding money, understanding the market, understanding how homes appreciate per year in what area are ways to handle these objections. So overall, when I'm talking about handling objections, what am I actually saying to you? Anybody?
That your questions matter.
You're sorry?
That the questions matter?
Well, the questions matter. But the other piece of it is you need to actually know your best way to answer the question or handle the objection, but we determine that they're questions because we're taking it from the positive perspective. The best way to handle that objection and answer the question is with knowledge. Yeah. Every objection I've given you has been, answer I've given you has been legitimately statistically valid.
Yeah.
It hasn't been a load of, shoveled at a consumer. Yeah. We've answered every question with a legitimate answer, whether it's sharing commission, how I get paid, length of contract, term of the market, how appraisals work, how the markets work, how much your home is appreciated for, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are actual answers to questions that they've asked. If we understand that objections are questions and we go in with as much information as we possibly can, we're in a much better position to answer their questions and in a much better position to close it. Another piece of this is language. And one of the big pieces is talking in the affirmative. And I've taught different ways of doing that in the past, but it is really important when we're talking about this. We talked about it at the beginning about body language and tonality and all that, but it's more than tonality. It's also the use of words. And I know the agents that do really well in their business are really good at this. And one of the ways is by talking in the affirmative and in the positive as if it's going to happen. because there's also there is a sales element to handling objection in a positive way. So you might be walking through a client's home on a pre-listing appointment to try and figure out how to price them, and they've told you that they've had other people through, but you speak in a way that says, you know what, that's great, but you know what, so when we're in and we're doing your photography, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, or we're going to want this time of day, or blah, blah, blah. If it's raining, we're going to come back because it's not, you know, we only get one shot for the first pictures, blah, blah, blah. So you're speaking as if you're going to be the one. There's a massive power to speaking in the affirmative when you're dealing with sales. And so by speaking to the clients and speaking to them in a way that, you know what, that's great. And when we're dealing with negotiations on your price, because we know what your net dollars are and we know what our average price is, we're going to be in a better position to negotiate to make sure we protect that profit regardless of commission. Do you see what happens when we do that?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea there is that we are actually paying attention and using our language as a way to also educate, and that also instills confidence. And one of the biggest ways and the biggest concerns that the client has is that they're actually really nervous and they're a little bit afraid. And so by being proactive and being very positive and speaking in the affirmative that this is going to happen, and when we're back and when we send in our stager or blah, 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 whatever it is you do in your business, you're also helping to handle that objection. Okay? So if we sort of wrap up what we've talked about, because we've been going for about an hour, we talked a lot about the mental state of what an objection is and it being a question. We also talked about body language, and that's how my video ended up on, because I ended up showing how you sit back and you know, not leaning in too close, and you know, don't tense up, and all of those things that go with good presentation. And we've talked a lot about making sure that we're covering it from the perspective of education and giving them an actual legitimate answer. One of the hardest parts of handling objections or answering questions is knowing when to stop talking. Number one thing, you guys will talk yourselves right out of a listing appointment if you're not careful. Anyone ever done that? I've done it. Done a long time ago. It's pretty normal.
I'm sure I will.
Oh, yeah.
And so part of this is actually learning. So when somebody says, you know, you explain commission and da-da-da, and this is your net, and whatever it is you've said based on whatever their question is, when you've answered the question, you need to stop. You need to stop talking.
Yep.
Shush, zip the lid, which I know is shocking that I can actually do this, but I can. And I'm self-aware if nothing else. And so it's knowing to say, so this is, you know, this is what I charge. I charge X, and this is what we do, and this is why, and then you're like, and any other questions? Like, it's just done. Like, next. And
yeah.
Very rarely do people come back after, because like, you've handled it, you've answered the question, and you need to stop talking. The power in stopping is that they will actually, if they have a further question versus objection, they will itemize exactly what it is. And then you know exactly what to answer versus just diarrhea of the mouth and blah, 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 and actually bringing up something that they weren't even concerned about. That's the other part that happens when you don't stop talking. So you might start talking about services, or I don't know, like marketing or whatever, and they never asked you a question about that. Okay, why are we talking about it? Sometimes you guys talk way too much. So if you stop throughout and say, do you have any questions on this section that we've covered? Like we just talked about, you know, if you're doing your listing agreement or your presentation and you compartmentalize it, then when you move on, they might bring up another question and you go, that's a great question. I think I'm going to cover that for you in about 2 minutes. If I don't, let me write it down. I'll make sure we come back to it. So when you finish that next section, whatever it is you're doing, you can say, okay, so you would ask me about X. Did I cover that? Yes. Okay, great. Next. So you're moving on. You're not just going to start talking and elaborating about the question that they asked you when you have already answered it. You will dig yourself into a hole. That's much harder to get out of. Okay?
Yeah.
So we've talked about language, we've talked about body, we've talked about tonality, we've talked about the use of words and being affirmative and positive and that instills a confidence and a security in that client, which is a big piece of why these questions are being asked. And we've also talked about knowing your market, knowing your numbers, being informed. Sometimes it's really easy to just, especially those of us that have been doing it for a long time, to just sort of quickly go out and run out to do a listing appointment because we've done so many of them, like, I got this, right? And sometimes we don't always do all our homework, and you'll know when you didn't, based on how that appointment goes or how long it was or how many questions they asked you versus when they don't. And so sometimes part of it is reminding ourselves not to take the shortcuts or to double check our numbers or double check our stats or bring the current numbers, not the numbers from a month ago, because they're different. So most about objection handling is remembering that they are questions, and that most people, when they get an answer to a question that's done in a calm, professional, friendly, non-aggressive manner, they'll be, and it's coming from the place of education, it's got a lot of information, they're going to actually answer the question, and they're going to be satisfied to move on. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. I am going to make sure that this particular handout, you guys know that I don't read handouts to you ever when I teach ever, but it is a really good script role play one. It's a seller one. There's this very similar one for buyers. If you go to KW Connect under the buyer presentation, this is the seller presentation, you'll find them and you can download them as well, see if Erin can find it. And in the meantime, I really encourage you to practice and to, number one, is to change the mindset around what is an objection, because you'll be way less nervous if you just remember that it's a question than thinking that you need to go in there with this big giant list of objection handlers that you're going to handle versus let me answer my consumers' questions and let's figure out how we can come to a place where we agree. Does anybody have any other questions or something specific that they wanted to ask or test me with before we wrap up for today?
Just a statement. I know at Xerox, I know I bring it up, but their sales training was really good. Whenever we got objections, they said, look at that as a gift, because if they're not interested, they wouldn't ask you.
That's a really good point, Kim. Yeah. And one of the things is that, when either you've got them, like sometimes people don't really have any objections and they're fine and they know enough or they're experienced enough, but it's a lot easier to have a conversation when someone's engaged with you. When someone is checked out and not asking you anything, it's a little harder to sometimes keep going. So it is an opportunity to distinguish yourself, especially if you're in competition, from somebody else by giving them a quality answer that they probably didn't get from the last person. Because you guys are really good. Okay? So Allison, thank you. She's a machine now. No one will ask me to answer. So keep practicing. If there's something in particular that's a concern, you can call me. We can play with it. We can do sessions in the office. Like whatever you guys need, we're here. But again, I really, really honestly believe that so much of the reason that we have challenge with our objections is because we're coming to it from the perception that it's this, and really it's this. An objection is a conversation, it's a question, and you will answer so much more naturally if you are less stressed about it than if you're coming to it from a place of, oh my God, they're going to ask me about my commission, right? So, if there's something that's a particular trigger or you keep getting, then that's the particular area that you want to practice. But remember, it is a conversation. And as Kim said, great word, opportunity to have a dialogue with your client, potential client, and answer their questions, because that's really what they're doing. They're answering questions. Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful day. I don't know how I did that. That's not what I meant to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Cool. Thanks.